Episode 2 of The Green Planet is called Water Worlds, and as you'd expect, it's about plants that either live in or near water. My voice may go at any point because I've had a bit of a cold, so bear with me. Also, just ignore the moustache. Doesn't exist. So this episode opens up with Attenborough just paddling away on a canoe. Lovely stuff. Yeah, great to see Attenborough. And the first major bit of footage we get involves plants that are adapted to dealing with torrents. So we see that plants that live in the water, instead of having roots, their stem basically acts as an anchor point to the rocks, which is quite cool. Interesting. Shows you that roots aren't really that useful in the water. So they've really had to adapt to deal with this habitat, which plants aren't really at home in. It's a good, interesting way of opening the episode, because this episode's basically all about adaptations. Then we see the red Macarenia, which is this really lovely looking plant. It's very crimson, very pink, and it just looks nice. I can't, to be honest with you, remember a huge amount about it from the sequence, to be honest, other than, oh, that looks very nice. Then we start exploring some of the more familiar water-based plants. Water lettuce is a plant that you see a lot in these kind of series, just floating around in the background, literally. But it was interesting to see their perspective, just it floating around the surface in the Pantanal. We see how it's basically unsinkable. Because it's covered in these waterproof hairs, it is essentially waterproof itself, so it's able to rise above the water when it's submerged. Quite cool. And we see the other plants there. We see them all battling for sunlight in the Pantanal, but ultimately the king of the Pantanal is the giant water lily. And we see all these other plants at the start. It's very harmonious almost. It's very different from the last episode, whereby the plants were very obviously competing. Here it just kind of feels like it's friendly competition. They're all able to find their niche and get some sunlight. It's nice. But then the giant water lily just emerges from the depths and just pushes them all out of the way. Like its leaves are massive. And before they even unfold, they just sweep around the water, just pushing everything else out of the way. And then they expand into these massive lilies, which are armed to the teeth. They've got loads of spines, which they use to puncture the other plants, push them out of the way and actually drown them. It's quite, it's quite hardcore. And we see there's loads of these leaves. The one plant has like 40 odd leaves. Pretty impressive. Water lilies here were portrayed as like some massive force of nature. They just can't really be beaten. All the other plants have no defences against it. And to say they're outcompeted is kind of an understatement. So that was a really cool sequence. It was very good. I really like the water lilies. I think the water lilies are a thing I remember very well from the Private Life of Plants. So we kind of had to talk about them here. Then we go to Japan and we see these little balls of algae called marimos. And they're eaten by swans. However, in order to get away from them, they basically roll away into deeper waters where they're still able to get sunlight. However, there is a lot more sediment here, and in order to shake that off, they kind of polish each other. They just rub against each other and polish each other. It's quite fun. I thought that was an alright sequence. It was interesting enough. Then we go to this lake that's got loads of plants in it, and we basically explore the kind of technicalities of how plants are able to live there. We talk a lot more about photosynthesis. I know we talked about it last time. We get a lot more detail into how it actually works here. And we see that they produce all these bubbles of gas, which actually sometimes lift the plants up, which is quite interesting. That was interesting. It just showed you how they oxygenate the water, how crucial they are to the environment there. Quite cool, because you don't really think of plants as being in water. Shows you that they are actually really important. Then we go to the rooftop mountains in Venezuela, the big plateaus. We've got bromeliads, which are quite a famous plant. I think we get a lot more famous ones here. The bromeliads obviously accumulate a lot of water, and a lot of little invertebrates live in there, so they're able to kind of live off them. However, these little pools are exploited by bladderworts, which are a plant that I've heard of before. I couldn't say I knew a lot about them, but they're portrayed as this proper, kind of evil, cunning predator that's able to extend into the bromeliad and replicate itself all over. It's got these little bladders that are full of gas and have a little trap door, and they suck all the little invertebrates in and just, dissolve them basically. Really cool. It was really interesting. I think that was a really interesting part of the episode. I think I didn't really know anything about bladderworts, although I'd heard of them before. I'm pretty sure they popped up in Private Life of Plants as well. I would imagine they did. And yeah, it was really cool. I really liked that sequence. And we kind of follow that theme to talk about more carnivorous plants. Sundew is a famous one. They've obviously got their sticky tendrils that obviously hook in insects that they're able to eat. The Venus flytrap's the most famous of these though. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about the mechanisms of Venus flytraps. Abra kind of shows us in quite great detail. They've got these three little hairs that get triggered by the fly. However, the Venus flytrap's not stupid. In order to make sure it's actually a meal, whatever's triggered it has to trigger another hair within 20 seconds. And then after it closes, ideally on a fly, it's then going to be triggered another 5 times before it'll actually dissolve it. Really interesting. I knew about the 3 hairs. I didn't know about the 5 further times. Shows you how thorough they are. I mean, it is still a pretty, energy expensive thing to actually produce enzymes to digest an insect. So, it makes sense. I thought that was pretty cool. The most in-depth look at, I think, Venus flytraps, I think. That or Life, I think there's the 2 I can think of. But that was really interesting. I really liked that. I think Venus flytraps are a pretty iconic plant. One of the most iconic, probably. So they kind of had to talk about it. Then we get to the more standard practices of plants. Flowering, we see crowfoot in the south of England, and the chalk streams, which are quite cool. They're quite recognisable plants, but I don't think I really ever thought of them very much. But we see that they basically extend their flowers to the surface and almost act like, land-based plants. All the insects pollinate them, all the birds, stuff like that. And we see that across the world. Obviously, flowering plants cannot be pollinated underwater, so they need to extend it to the surface. So that was cool. It was good to see that. And following on from that, we talk about seeds. Kind of like last week where we had the flowers and the seeds. Here we kind of follow that same sequence. In order to be spread, they've still got to be dispersed. Obviously, in water, most of it would land in the water and go downstream. However, the chances of then settling are pretty slim because, as Attenborough says, this just leads to the sea ultimately. And here we visit something we saw in Seven Worlds, One Planet, which was the Piripitanga. The Piripitanga, the fish that jump out the water and grab the seeds, which are obviously encased in fruits, hence why they're doing it. They eat the fruits, transport the seeds upstream when they migrate, and that's a much more economical way for the seeds to disperse. Really cool. That was a great sequence in Seven Worlds, One Planet. It was a great sequence here. I like that. And then to cap it all off, we talk about plants that live not in fresh water, but in salt water. Here I would have thought they'd have talked about mangroves. They didn't. They actually didn't talk about mangroves at all in this episode. But here we talk about seagrass, which, to be honest, are probably a more important habitat. We see these seagrass seeds, floating through the water, and they eventually settle on the seabed, where they're able to form all these massive meadows, which obviously are very important for carbon sinks. It was interesting actually looking at the root system, because they kind of look like peat almost. Like what you'd get in a land-based peat bog. It looked very similar to that. Obviously, peat's a massive carbon sink. These are massive carbon sinks, so it does stand to reason they would look similar. And we see all the animals that feed on the seagrass, turtles, dugongs, all these animals. And it's a pretty important habitat and a really good one to finish off on, I think. Then we get the diaries. It's all about the people filming the giant water lilies. It was interesting looking at the people in the Pantanal filming the surface stuff, and the guys in essentially a big swimming pool filming the underwater stuff. And the more in-depth close-ups, obviously, it needs to be filmed in a more controlled environment. The Pantanal's not really that, so it makes sense to do it in England in a studio. It's what they did in Private Life of Plants. I thought that was pretty cool. Again, it was interesting enough. So yeah, this episode is good. It's a pretty good episode. I think it might not be quite as good as the last one, but it's pretty cool. It's all about adaptations. And I gotta say, I was impressed with all the adaptations here. The highlights for me, probably the Venus flytraps. I like the seagrass at the end though. I pretty much liked all the stuff in here. It's all pretty cool. So yeah, I liked it. This was a good episode. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this episode. What were your highlights? Let me know. And as ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine. And I'll see you next time for the next episode, which is all about woodlands, I think. And so yeah, look forward to that. And I'll see you next time. And goodbye.